And for tonight's COVID conversation, I'm joined by the Vienna High School Superintendent, Josh Stafford. Mr. Stafford, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Now we're starting October, so kids have been in school for a little more than a month now. How are things going?
I think that probably the hardest part to any important task is getting started. And so we've overcame that hurdle of August and September and kicking off the week here in October. And it's going well. Of course, the unknowns back in August are a little bit more known. People are settled in that routine. I'm one of those odd guys that whenever it gets to be end of July, early August, and you walk through that back to school aisle at Walmart or wherever the local store is, and you smell the crayons and the notebooks, I get a little excited. So, so that excitement has carried us through, and school's going well in October.
Good. And I think, like you and teachers and students, you're excited to be back in the classroom, back at school. Do you think it's appropriate for, students and teachers to be learning in person right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it takes me back to a memory of March 13th of 2020, a date that will live in the history of Illinois education, I think, forever. Of course, that was the day that Governor Pritzker came out and announced the closing of schools for the remaining quarter of that particular school year. Later on in that summer, we were able to meet with our student council students just to give them a voice into the progress and where we should be in that type of a thing for the coming school year, the 21-22 school year, or the 2021 school year at that time. And the resounding voice of that particular student council was, we want to be back in class. Whatever that takes, we want to be back in class. And it's one of those things, I think, that for kids to be begging to be back in class, we maybe didn't expect, but it was really refreshing to hear them reflect on that. And at that time, and they continue to be of that same attitude, whatever that takes for us to be back in class, to be in person, to be back involved in our activities and extracurriculars, they are willing to do that. We were very fortunate that last year we were able to be in school 5 days a week in Johnson County with over 90% of our students in person. So we had school in person every single day, even last year. With 90% of our students in person. I think that was just a huge win for kids and families in our community.
And, we even just heard it in, Rena Roy's story. Governor Gavin Newsom in California says once it's approved by the FDA, the COVID vaccine will be added to the list of school-required vaccines.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
At this time, I think that I would reflect on my own personal situation, right? As I make those type of decisions, I consult with my primary care physician, as I would advise anyone to do. And I think that parents have to do the same thing, consult with their pediatricians or primary care physicians, and make that decision to the best of their ability with the experts that they have access to. Unfortunately, this vaccine situation has just become very polarized and political. And really, we shouldn't let our healthcare decisions be dictated by the polarization in politics that seem to surround this particular issue. And it's very unfortunate that that's where some of us are at this point. But I think those decisions are made well by parents. I think parenting is the hardest job on the face of the planet. And I know that in our community we have parents that love their kids and want to make the best decision for them. And I think that's best done in consultation with their primary care physician.
And, touching off of that, what has, parents' reaction been to having, students back in school and, mask mandates, some of the decisions that have to be made?
Sure. So lots of issues there, right, as you reopen school, particularly this year, kind of interesting. And I know earlier I said getting started is the hardest part. And I think we've cleared that hurdle, and that's been a good thing for kids and families. But you've seen school districts all over the state of Illinois who've responded to mask mandates or testing or various items such as that in different ways. And in our community, I think basically we've had to land at this point to where we've got to keep the main thing the main thing. Yeah. And there are always going to be 10,000 distractions, and those distractions can derail us from the main thing. And when it comes to school, all over the state, all over the nation, all over the world, right, the main thing is that we give our young people the opportunity at a great education so that they can grow up from being boys and girls to young men and young women.
Yeah.
And if we'll keep focus on that, mask mandates and all this other noise really kind of takes a secondary seat, as it should. And not that those things aren't important, but our long-term end goal here is far more important than these short-term inconveniences. So I think that our community's really been just top-notch in understanding the long game as opposed to some short-term inconveniences. And we just haven't seen a lot of noise necessarily about that. There's a time where you transcend the noise and keep advancing the ball.
Got to keep going. And,
yeah.
Vienna, you had to cancel the varsity football season. I'm sure that couldn't have been an easy decision, but what goes into determining something like that?
Sure. We're proud of our football team, and our football team actually is going to be playing this Friday night. So that's our JV team. So we have a co-op with Goreville. Vienna and Goreville play football together. And our football program in Johnson County is relatively young. It's existed for the last decade or so. Whereas if you look at Johnson City or Massac or AJ, right, they've had football for 50 plus years, generations of football.
Yeah.
And so you have dads who have played and are now raising their own children, and just that community knowledge, experiential knowledge that exists in those communities that we're not quite there yet. You can't take a 10-year program and make it a 50-year program overnight. Right. So we're excited about our football program. Glad that it's gotten started. Our Johnson County Youth League's done a great job this summer of recruiting younger junior high age students into that program, and we've seen some excitement there. We think we'll continue to energize that. So we continue to play football. Vine and Goreville continue to play football, so come out and support them Friday night. They had a tough loss against I think it was Edwards County last week, but we're proud of what they're doing, and undoubtedly a difficult decision, but for this season was the right decision to keep that program moving in a good trajectory.
And being that we are in October right now, like you said, you were able to learn, in person. I think there are some concerns about where students typically are as compared to, where they might be with, kind of the pandemic impacting learning schedules. Are you seeing any of that at Vienna?
Sure. To have an entire quarter of school in our situation back in March 2020 through the end of the school year, to be transitioned to remote, and my goodness, I've got to brag on teachers like all over the world. How in the world one day do you show up and say, yeah, oh, by the way, we know that you're used to having your first grade class in person, but somehow we're going to have you educate them remotely for the rest of the year. Right. Teachers moved mountains for their students, and it was encouraging to watch that. I'm still encouraged by that to this day. But again, I reflect on what our student council said in the summer of 20. We want to be in person. And a lot of people refer to that gap or that time frame as a learning loss. And I think that that's a wrong phrase. It's a mythical phrase. I think it's just unfinished learning, right? So we are filling in that gap. We're going to finish up that learning and get those young folks caught up and continue to see them grow. So the other thing I think that we have to remember in the world is that everybody experienced that, right? It's not just one student in one class or just your children at home. It's everybody across the world that has some unfinished learning there that they didn't get to experience. But that being said, while there was unfinished learning in the classroom, to walk through and endure what they have endured, they've experienced a ton of experiential learning, right, that you could never capture in a classroom. So it's anecdotal at this point, how we evaluate that. Of course, the federal government and state government, they've adjusted testing schedules and things like that. Right. So to really quantify that with a standardized nationally normed assessment, we don't have that data at this point just because of that interruption. But unfinished things will get caught up. And so it's not a reason for students or families to be discouraged.
All right. Mr. Stafford, I want to thank you so much for being with us.